Good afternoon. My name is Marty Minkoff, Supervisor of Service Planning here at King County Metro. Metro ridership has been booming. In the year 2012, we saw record ridership on our Metro and Sound Transit routes with 132 million rides carried. We've also seen ridership increases on our major corridors. On our rapid ride routes, we saw a 35% increase. 42% increase in rides in the Alaskan Way Viaduct corridor, and an additional 40% increase on our State Route 520 bridge corridor, which was newly tolled recently. While ridership is booming, let's talk a moment about what's also happened financially since 2008. What Metro has done about it, what the status is of some of the temporary funding measures, and what is the budget gap that we need to close. Since 2008, Metro has experienced a severe shortfall in sales tax revenue. Sales tax is the lifeblood of Metro's revenue, composing 60% of Metro's revenues. Even with a poor economy, since 2009, Metro has managed to keep service on the street. Since 2009, we've taken multiple actions totaling $800 million. These actions have included staff reductions. They've included labor contract savings. Labor cost savings alone have preserved 10% of bus services. We've drawn money from one-time cash savings from our reserve funds, our capital reserve and our fleet reserve, and we've cut back significantly on our capital programs. On the revenue side, we've also generated additional money through fare increases. Since 2009, fares have increased 80%. We've also eliminated the ride-free zone downtown. And as well, County Council enacted a temporary congestion reduction charge, which we'll talk about in a moment. All told, we've been able to close our annual financial gap by $148 million. And we continue to seek more and more efficient ways to keep more bus services on the road. I'd like to talk a bit about Metro's financial picture next year, 2014. In 2011, the legislature gave the King County Council the authority to create the congestion reduction charge. The legislature intended it to be a temporary 2-year stopgap measure pending the passage of a statewide transportation package. The statewide transportation revenue package has not been passed yet by the legislature, and this 2-year funding measure ends in June 2014. Also ending in June 2014 is funding that Metro has been receiving from the Washington State Department of Transportation to mitigate the impacts of construction on the Alaskan Way Viaduct Deep Port Tunnel project. Without additional ongoing revenues, starting next year, Metro's annual budget gap is $75 million. To close the gap, we need to cut 600,000 service hours, or approximately 17% of our service, and 45,000 hours of additional bus services that had been funded by the Alaskan Way Viaduct construction mitigation funds provided by WSDOT. We need to make these cuts in order to live within our financial means. Stable ongoing funding is necessary to enable Metro to maintain service and meet our region's growing public transportation needs. Instead of cutting service by 17%, we should be growing service by 15% based upon our own warrants as contained in our service guidelines, which I'll be talking about in a moment. These would be an additional service hours, about 500,000 additional service hours needed to meet current ridership needs to help keep buses on schedule. While our elected officials are working toward obtaining that additional ongoing revenue source, we have to plan and prepare the service reduction proposals for the worst case scenario. This is a scenario we hope we never have to see. The cuts are proposed throughout the county, with all communities bearing the impacts. We took a rational, even-handed approach at preparing the service reduction proposals, guided by the County Council adopted strategic plan, which includes our service guidelines. The service guidelines provide a transparent, data-driven process that enable us to make decisions about adding, reducing, or changing transit services to deliver high-quality services to the areas of the county that need it most. When reducing service, as is the situation we're facing now, the guidelines call for us to balance productivity, social equity, and geographic value, while preserving a network that can serve as many people as possible. Metro used the 4 reduction priorities contained in the service guidelines to help shape the service reduction proposal. To cut 17% of service hours, a very large number of hours, we went through the 4-step process as contained in the service guidelines. These 4 steps are called reduction priorities. We started looking at our services, all of our routes by time period, with reduction priority 1. Reduction priority 1 calls for reducing service on routes that are in the lowest 25% of productivity. That's the lowest performing service in the metro system. We focus on duplicative service and peak services that are not meeting criteria, and services that are at or above their target service levels in the corridor in which they operate. An example is Route 161, commuter service operating between Kent, Renton, East Hill, and downtown Seattle. This route is below the 25% productivity level threshold and is proposed for elimination. After reduction priority 1, we then go to reduction priority 2 and look at our routes. Reduction priority 2 calls for restructuring service to serve as many people as possible within a given geographic area. We look at routes, how routes could be modified and how they could be combined to serve the greatest number of people. An example is while Route 12 would be scaled back to peak-only service due to its lower productivity, Route 2 would be rerouted from Madison to Seneca in order to cover one of the highest ridership streets on First Hill. Unfortunately, to reach the reduction proposal target of 17%, we had to cut deeper than priority 1 and reduction priority 2. We went to reduction priority 3, which calls for us to look at the next lowest productivity levels, in other words, 25% to 50%. An example would be the Route 148 Fairwood to Renton Transit Center, which is below the 50% productivity level. This is proposed to be reduced from 30-minute to 60-minute service in the peak and the midday. Route 40, Northgate to downtown by way of Ballard. This is a low performer in the off-peak period, and it's proposed to be reduced from 15-minute service to 20-minute frequency in the midday and on Saturdays. We then went to reduction priority 4. Reduction priority 4 calls for reducing service on routes that are among the lowest performers and are below the target service levels in their particular corridor. An example is Route 917, Algona Pacific to Auburn Station, which is a low performer and below its target service level. And it's proposed to have its off-peak service eliminated. It would operate only in the peak hour. Again, we've prepared the service reduction proposals for the worst case financial scenario. Our county executive, our county council are working closely with the state legislature to try to find an ongoing sustainable source of revenue that can help Metro keep current service going and expand service to meet future needs. We know if enacted, these service reduction proposals would have tremendous impacts on riders such as you and future riders, and we take that very seriously.
Right now, Metro's conducting outreach around the county to hear from riders about how these proposed cuts will affect people, and we're hearing public input between now and February 7th. We encourage you to share with us how these cuts will affect you, as well as ideas for how we might continue to make these overall reductions without shifting the burden from one community to another, and yet still serve the same amount of riders or more riders. Metro will pass a recommendation along to the Executive and King County Council in the April timeframe. King County Council will consider this recommendation in the May timeframe and adopt it. Cuts would be phased in beginning in September of this year and ending in September of 2015 over 4 service changes. Metro's financial forecast may change, and that would change how these cuts are phased in. In addition, stable, ongoing funding and revenue for Metro could change how these cuts are phased in, and that's in the hands of the state legislature or King County elected officials. King County Executive Dow Constantine has pledged to look for sources of revenue for Metro should the state legislature not act in its next legislative session. Without knowing any of those futures, Metro has to plan for a worst case scenario, and that's what we're out doing now and hoping to get your feedback on.